Nia sat cross-legged on the hard clay floor, her fingers tracing patterns in the dust that no one else could see. The compound around her buzzed with life, pots clanging, chickens fluttering, footsteps echoing, but none of it dared disturb the silence that clung to the air like smoke. In Chief Aimo's house, silence wasn't just a rule, it was law. Especially for the women. Especially for the girls. Especially for Nia. She had learned early on that speaking above a whisper invited punishment. But even whispers were dangerous when they belonged to Nia, for her voice wasn't like others. Her words carried more than sound, they carried color. Emotion. Vision. She had discovered it when she was 5, trying to describe the sky to her sick mother who couldn't rise from her mat. It's not just blue, she had said, it's the kind of blue that feels like laughing after crying. And the moment the words left her lips, the walls shimmered with a soft wave of aquamarine, and the room lit up with the echo of gentle laughter. Her mother had smiled, really smiled for the first time in weeks. But Chief Aimo had walked in just then, and the magic had died in a shout. He had struck her without question, called it witchcraft, said her mouth was cursed and needed cleansing. Nia was locked in the smokehouse for 2 days. When she emerged, she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just held the colors tighter inside her chest, where no one could steal them. Chief Aimo was a towering man, his presence enough to chill the bones of anyone who dared stand in his shadow. He spoke of tradition like it was carved into stone by the gods themselves. Girls must not speak unless spoken to. Women must lower their eyes and minds, he would say as he pounded his staff into the earth. No one dared challenge him. The villagers feared him, and his word was law. He claimed silence preserved order. That women's voices carried chaos. That feelings and colors were distractions. But Nia knew better. She could feel the weight of words unsaid pressing against the walls of their home, like thunderclouds too full to hold back rain. Every time someone bit back a truth or swallowed a dream, the air thickened with gray. Every time her stepmother nodded silently through pain, every time her sisters hid their laughter in their sleeves, the house dimmed a little more. But Nia couldn't help it. When she was alone, she still spoke. Softly, carefully, to the corners of the world that still listened. At night, in the safety of darkness, she would whisper stories to herself under the cracked thatch roof. And the ceiling would dance with color, glowing reds and golds when she spoke of courage, swirling violets when she dreamed of freedom, cool greens when she whispered comfort. The colors didn't scare her. They soothed her. They felt like home. But she knew if anyone saw them again, especially Aimo, it could mean more than a beating. It could mean exile. Or worse. Still, the gift wouldn't die. The older she grew, the more powerful it became. Even her silence became charged. If she thought too deeply about something joyful, the air would warm. If sorrow struck her heart, the room would dim. Her emotions bled into the world, whether she liked it or not. She tried to stay still, to stay numb, but she was a storm in human skin, and storms cannot stay quiet forever. One afternoon, while helping grind millet beside her youngest sister, Nia caught her reflection in the water pot. Her eyes shimmered, not with tears but with color. A flicker of soft blue, like calm water after rain, glowed around her for a heartbeat. Her sister gasped, dropping the bowl, and the sound was like thunder in their silent world. Chief Aimo appeared in the doorway moments later, his eyes like coals. "What happened here?" he asked, voice low, dangerous. "Nothing, father," Nia said quickly, heart pounding. But it was too late. Her words had trailed a thread of silvery light into the air, like mist curling upward. Her sister stared at it, transfixed, mouth agape. Chief Aimo followed her gaze and saw it, just a flicker, just a wisp, but enough to turn his rage to fire. He dragged Nia by the wrist into the center of the courtyard. The neighbors peeked through fences, drawn by the noise. He raised his staff and declared, "This girl brings poison with her tongue. She will not endanger this household with her cursed speech." He turned to the gathered watchers. "The gods gave us silence for a reason. Let no one forget." But Nia stood there, trembling yet rooted. Her heart beat a drum against her ribs. For a second, she considered begging, apologizing, promising never to speak again. But something ancient stirred in her, an old ache, a buried roar, and before she could stop herself, she opened her mouth. "No," she said. The single word exploded in color. Not just blue or gold or red, but every hue that had ever existed. It burst from her like a sunrise, rushing across the compound, flooding every corner with light. The watchers gasped. Children clapped without meaning to. Even the chickens stopped to stare. Her voice painted the sky above them in swirls that felt like hope and memory and every truth they had ever swallowed. Chief Aimo stumbled backward, shielding his face. "Witch," he screamed. But the villagers didn't echo him this time. One by one women stepped forward. First her stepmother. Then her aunt. Then others. Faces that had long been blank now brimmed with emotion. Their mouths opened not in silence but in song. In color. In truth. And the air shimmered with it. Nia didn't run. She didn't hide. She stood tall in the center of it all, her heart breaking and mending all at once. The world had feared her voice. But now, for the first time, it listened. The night air was thick with heat, the kind that clung to skin and made the shadows feel alive. In the dim corner of the hut, Nia sat on a woven mat with her youngest sibling, little Sua, cradled in her arms. The baby had been crying for hours, hungry, restless, teeth pushing through tender gums. Her stepmother had long since retreated in exhaustion, and the rest of the household dared not intervene. It was past sunset. Past silence. After dark, Chief Aimo expected stillness. No voices. No humming. No sound. But Sua's sobs wouldn't stop. Nia rocked her gently, pressing her lips to the baby's forehead. "Shoo," she whispered, the word barely more than a breath. But Sua's cries only grew louder. Nia glanced at the doorway. No footsteps yet. Maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't hear. She leaned down and sang. Softly. So softly it might have been mistaken for wind. A lullaby her mother used to sing. The melody wrapped around them like warmth, low, melodic, ancient. The kind of song passed down from mothers who dared to love even under tyranny. The air stirred gently, faint streaks of lavender and gold twining around Nia's words. Sua stopped crying. But someone else had heard. The door slammed open with a force that shook the rafters. Chief Aimo's figure filled the entrance like a storm cloud. His eyes burned through the dark. In one hand he held a wooden switch, in the other nothing, but his rage was enough. "You dare sing?" he bellowed. Nia froze, still holding the child, still tasting the melody on her lips. She wanted to lie, to say she hadn't spoken. But the room still glowed faintly from the lullaby's light. There was no hiding it. I only wanted to calm her," she whispered. Chief Aimo stepped forward. "That tongue of yours is cursed. You pollute this house with your defiance." He turned and shouted, "Bring the peppers." Nia's stomach dropped. She had heard the stories, old punishments whispered about in hushed tones. But she had never seen them used. Never imagined they would be used on her. Two older boys, distant relatives who lived under Aimo's roof, entered the room holding a bowl of crushed red pepper and ground ash. The air stung just from its presence. The mixture burned the nostrils. Sua began crying again, sensing the shift in energy. Nia clutched the baby closer. "Give her here," Aimo snapped. "No, please," Nia begged, but one of the boys tore Sua from her arms. The other grabbed Nia by the shoulders, forcing her to her knees. Her cries meant nothing. The bowl was brought forward. Chief Aimo knelt before her, his eyes gleaming. "You think your voice is magic?" he growled. "Let's see how it sings when the fire sits in your mouth." And with that, he dipped two thick fingers into the fiery paste and shoved them into her mouth. The pain was immediate and blinding. It was not just heat, it was fury, 1,000 tiny knives stabbing at her tongue, her gums, the roof of her mouth. Nia thrashed, gagged, choked, but the boys held her steady. Her throat spasmed. Tears poured down her face. Her lungs burned from the effort not to scream. She collapsed forward, trembling, lips raw and blistering. The others watched in silence. No one dared move. No one dared speak. Chief Aimo stood tall. "Let that be the end of it," he said, turning away as if he had simply swept the floor. Nia lay on the ground, her body curled inward, her face slick with tears and sweat. Her mouth was aflame. Every breath was agony. But deep beneath the searing pain, something stirred. She saw colors, brighter than ever before. Not soft hues or fading whispers, but blazing golds, violent crimsons, stormy blues. Her spirit was no longer trying to hide the magic. It was pushing forward, demanding to be felt, to be seen, to be heard. The pain didn't silence her, it summoned something new. A deeper, older fire. One that lived not in her tongue but in her bones. In her blood. She could feel it coursing through her. The heat from the peppers was no longer just on her lips. It was inside her. Fueling her. Awakening a roar that had slept too long. Every heartbeat echoed like a drum. Every breath fed the flame. She didn't speak that night. She couldn't. But her silence was no longer surrender. It was preparation. In the days that followed the punishment, Nia's lips swelled and cracked. Her mouth throbbed with every breath and her voice, once soft and vibrant, had been reduced to a painful rasp. She no longer tried to speak. Not because she feared another punishment but because the pain was too raw. Too deep. Her tongue refused to move. Her throat burned at the thought of forming even a single word. She kept to herself, curled up in the darkest corners of the compound, silent and still. Her siblings and the servants tiptoed around her like she was a ghost. Chief Aimo, satisfied with her silence, didn't bother her. He believed the fire had finally broken her spirit. But something else was happening. It started with a whisper, barely noticeable, like wind brushing against the walls. The youngest of the siblings, little Sua, was the first to mention it. One night, she told her sister, "Nia is singing to me when I sleep." The others laughed nervously, brushing it off as a dream. But the next night, the second sister heard it too, a hum in the dark, weaving through the cracks in the mud walls, soft and warm like a hand stroking her hair. By the end of the week they were all hearing it. The whispers came only at night. Just as the household settled into silence, the walls would begin to murmur. Gentle words floated through the air, not in Nia's voice exactly but in the tone of her spirit. They carried memories of laughter, the scent of their late mother's stew, the feeling of sunlight on bare feet. Sometimes it was just a single word repeated like a lullaby, peace, home, truth. Other times, full thoughts filled the silence like warm rain. Nia remained quiet, her mouth closed, her body weak. But her mind had found a new path, through the spaces no one controlled. Through the very walls meant to keep her imprisoned. The servants noticed it next. The young boy who swept the yard heard a voice while scrubbing pots. "You are not nothing," it said as if spoken inside his chest. "You see more than they know." The kitchen girl, long accused of stealing food, heard a whisper the moment before she was blamed again. "Tell them to look at the chief's son's room." When she did, the stolen yam was found hidden in the boy's mat. Slowly, people began to listen to the whispers, even if they didn't understand where they came from. They stopped speaking about them aloud, but in secret, they followed the voices' gentle nudges, small truths laid bare by invisible words. Aimo noticed too, though he never admitted it. It began as a murmur just beyond his hearing. At first he thought it was dreams, then the wind. But the voice grew bolder, closer. "You lie," it said once. Clear. Cold. "You are afraid." The first time he heard it, he struck the wall with his staff, shouting curses at the darkness. The second time he lit a fire and stayed awake all night. But no matter what he did, the voice returned. It knew things. "Your father hit you just like this," it whispered. "You cried too. You locked her voice away, but you fear it because it reminds you of your own mother. You built this silence to protect your shame." The voice offered no threats. It made no noise beyond words. But it grew harder and harder for him to bear. At night, Aimo began to pace the courtyard, muttering to himself. He burned herbs. He summoned elders to cleanse the compound. But nothing stopped the whispers. They knew him. And worse, they knew his truth. Meanwhile, Nia lay still under her blanket, her eyes open to the dark ceiling, her body wrapped in pain and quiet. But her spirit surged with new power. She no longer needed her mouth to speak. She was not confined to her tongue. Her thoughts moved like wind through cracks, like water through roots, slipping into places where no hand could stop them. She had become the air between walls. Her siblings, once scared of their own voices, began to talk more freely during the day. The girls hummed as they fetched water. The boys laughed openly in the sun. The servants smiled more, shared more, even in Aimo's presence. A new feeling crept into the compound, not rebellion, not yet, but something just as dangerous, comfort. Nia saw it from her corner. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The voice in the walls had become her true self, wordless but heard, silent but strong. She was no longer bound by the rules of sound. No pepper could sear away what she had now. No hand could erase what had taken root in the quiet. Even the walls themselves seemed different, softer, more alive. They listened to her, echoed her, held her words like sacred seeds. Every night she planted more hopes, truths, names. And the house grew full, not of fear but of color again. And in the darkest corners of the night, even Chief Aimo could no longer pretend he wasn't listening. The center of Chief Aimo's vast compound held a forbidden place. A circular hall unlike any other, its ceiling made entirely of thick, curved glass imported from lands beyond the sea. While the rest of the compound was made of red mud walls and thatched roofs, this room stood like a jewel buried in stone, its polished floor gleaming, its ceiling capturing the stars. Aimo called it Il Amoli, the House of Light, and it was his sanctuary. No servant, no wife, no child was permitted to enter. Especially not Nia. He claimed it was a sacred space for reflection, for aligning with the stars and seeking clarity. But the truth, whispered among the servants, was that he used it to hide his shame, to commune with his own ghosts. Many believed that the glass kept the truth sealed in, and everything else out. Some said he built it to look beyond judgment. Others believed he simply wanted to feel above the rest of them. Nia had never seen the inside, only glimpsed reflections of stars through the arched glass at night, when she lay quietly in the courtyard, watching the sky and wondering what it must feel like to stand inside that hollow chamber and speak freely to the heavens. Her voice had been stolen from the earth, but perhaps, just perhaps, the sky would still accept it. That night, the wind was restless, the moon swollen and silver. The compound was asleep. Nia rose silently, her body still aching from the pepper wounds, her movements deliberate and slow. She crossed the courtyard barefoot, heart beating steady and strong, not like fear, but like fate. The entrance to the glass room was sealed with an iron latch. She had studied it for years and knew where Aimo hid the key, beneath the broken pot near the herb garden. Her fingers trembled as she took it, not from fear of getting caught, but from the feeling that she was about to cross into something sacred. Something hers. The door creaked open, and for the first time, Nia stepped into the hall of glass. It was cold, quiet, vast. The walls were dark, but the ceiling, oh the ceiling, was alive. The stars above pulsed gently through the glass, distant and yet impossibly close. The moon poured its light in silver streams down the curved panels, reflecting onto the floor like scattered diamonds. It was as if the sky itself had knelt down to listen. Nia walked to the center of the room. The silence was heavier than any she'd known, but it didn't feel like Aimo's silence. Oppressive, forced, cruel. This was another kind. A holy stillness. A waiting. She tilted her head up. And she spoke. Her voice was cracked and hoarse. The first few words rasped from her throat like the rustling of dry leaves. But she pushed on. I am not a curse, she said, voice low but sure. I am not your shame. Her breath stirred the air. A current moved around her feet. I was born to speak, and not just with words. I speak in color, in thought, in wind, in silence that breathes. And as if the stars heard her, the wind outside began to stir, soft at first, then urgent, whispering through the cracks in the compound. Her voice rose, gaining strength not in volume but in truth. I speak to what listens. And you, she looked up, eyes locked on the stars, you always listen. A gust of wind tore through the trees beyond the walls. The tall grasses swayed violently, the leaves trembled. From somewhere deep in the earth, a low hum echoed up into the room. The air shifted. The stars shimmered. And then the ceiling, the glass itself, responded. The moonlight bent. The stars rippled. Color spilled across the ceiling as if her words painted the sky. It was not the soft hues from before. This was sharp and bold and uncontained. Crimson streaked with indigo. Gold threaded through ash gray. The colors of rage and healing, of fire and rebirth. She wasn't speaking in sentences anymore. She was speaking in soul. And the sky answered. The wind howled now, slamming into the walls of the compound. Doors rattled on their hinges. Chickens clucked wildly. People stirred in their sleep. And Chief Aimo sat up in his bed, heart racing, eyes darting toward the glowing pulse rising from the heart of his domain. He knew what was happening. The girl had entered Isle Moli. The voice he had tried to silence was now ringing through the sky. Back in the glass hall, Nia stood still in the middle of the whirlwind of light, her breath calm, her voice gone quiet again. She had spoken all she needed. The sky had heard her. The wind had carried her truth beyond walls, beyond rooms, beyond silence. She turned and walked out before anyone came. She closed the door gently, placed the key back where it belonged, and returned to her mat beneath the stars. But the sky would never forget her voice now. And neither would the walls of the room that once belonged to Aimo alone. The sun had barely begun its climb when Chief Aimo began preparing his household. The compound buzzed with urgency. Mats were beaten clean. Floors were swept until they gleamed. Walls were scrubbed. Servants moved quickly and silently, knowing the weight of the day ahead. The elders were coming. They were the most revered men of the region, keepers of tradition, judges of honor, and makers of futures. Today they would observe Aimo's household, his leadership, his order. If satisfied, they would put forward his name for the High Council, a position of great power, the final step in a long climb he had spent years shaping. He had silenced his wives, disciplined his children, crushed rebellion before it could whisper. He believed his home was the embodiment of discipline and tradition, a reflection of himself, rigid, proud, unshakable. But beneath the polished floors, beneath the perfect silence, a current stirred. Nia watched from a distance as servants lined up near the gate. She sat quietly beneath the old fig tree, lips still tender from the punishment, voice still raw. Since the night in the glass room, something had shifted around her. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The air carried her presence. The wind bent around her. The walls still whispered when she passed. The elders arrived just after the midday sun peaked, their robes trailing behind them, their eyes sharp and unreadable. They entered the compound with the weight of generations behind them. Chief Aimo bowed low, smiling with perfect composure, offering greetings soaked in formality. His wives stood in lines, heads bowed. His children sat in order of age, silent and still. He had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in his mind. They were led into the main hall and offered cola nuts and honeyed water. Songs were played on flutes. Dancers performed brief, contained movements. Everything was elegant, predictable. But as the elders toured the household, something began to change. The mirrors in the hallways, normally clear and gleaming, began to fog as they passed. First one, then another. An elder paused to wipe one clean, but the condensation returned instantly, as if breath was trapped behind the glass. A whisper drifted through the back corridor. One elder turned sharply. "Who said that?" he asked. Chief Aimo looked confused. "Said what?" The elder narrowed his eyes. "A name. I heard a name." "No one spoke, elder," Aimo replied, a nervous smile breaking the edge of his calm. Another elder paused near the water basin. The still surface rippled, though no breeze touched it. He leaned closer and for a moment he saw the reflection of a girl with burning eyes and cracked lips behind him, standing where no one stood. He turned swiftly but the corridor was empty. "It is nothing," Aimo said again and again, each time with a little less conviction. The elders moved into the glass-roofed room. Aimo had prepared it meticulously. Incense burned at the corners. Sacred symbols had been drawn in chalk. The ceiling gleamed under the sunlight. But the moment they stepped in, the air thickened. The room was too quiet. Not peaceful, but stifling, like sound had been swallowed. Then came the chant. Oh, faint. A sound that trembled through the bones more than the ears. One of the elders froze, his face pale. His lips parted. "Did you hear that?" he asked the others. "Hear what?" they replied in confusion. A voice, chanting, like mourning, or a warning. Aimo laughed nervously. "Perhaps a wind outside, elder." But the elder knew what he'd heard. The voice didn't come from outside, it came from above, from the ceiling of stars. It had said his name. And something else. A plea. A cry. That night, the elders were given special lodging in Aimo's guest quarters. They were fed richly, given fine cloth, and shown every courtesy. But the elder who had heard the chant did not sleep. His dreams were thick with heat and shadow. He saw the compound as if from above, the rooms glowing faintly. He saw the glass ceiling shatter and a voice rise like smoke from the ruins. He saw a girl, burned lips, fierce eyes, standing beneath a storm of stars, screaming a sound that wasn't rage or sorrow but something older. He watched her open her mouth and pour fire into the sky. And then he saw her fall, into the dirt, into silence, but her scream remained ringing like bells through the night. He woke with a gasp. His skin was damp. His heart raced. He sat up and found ash on his clothes. Black, fine, clinging like fingerprints. His sleeping mat was clean. The room was untouched. But his robe bore the shadow of smoke. He touched it with trembling fingers. At dawn the elders prepared to leave. Aimo greeted them in the courtyard, all smiles again, but his eyes darted too often toward the sky, as if afraid of what might descend. The elder who dreamed said nothing. But as he passed the fig tree he paused. Nia sat beneath it, her hands folded in her lap, her face tilted toward him. She didn't speak. She didn't move. But the wind stirred between them. He nodded just once. And in that brief moment the elder understood. The silence in this house was not peace. It was suppression. And the voice they tried to bury had roots too deep to kill. That night he told no one of the dream. But he began to listen differently. The decision came swiftly, as most of Chief Aimo's decrees did. Absolute, furious, final. He had tolerated enough. The whispers, the strange dreams, the elder's unease, the way even silence no longer obeyed him. Nia was still quiet, still broken-lipped and barefoot beneath the fig tree. Yet her presence pulsed through the compound like a heartbeat he couldn't silence. That morning he commanded every servant, every child, every wife, find it all. Every scrap she's ever written. Letters, stories, charms, riddles, folded dreams in cloth, carved words in stone. If it carries her hand, it will burn. They obeyed without question, though some with heavy hearts. In secret corners of the compound, they retrieved poems hidden under mats, symbols traced behind cooking pots, stories written in chalk behind water jars. One boy found a leaf with words scratched into it, still green. A girl turned in a piece of cloth embroidered with a line Nia had sewn long ago. We are not quiet because we are empty, we are quiet because we are waiting. By afternoon they had gathered it all in a woven basket. Writings soft and worn, scrolls of dried plantain fiber, tiny notes folded 100 times. Aimo poured them into the pit behind the glass-roofed hall, the same fire pit where he burned old offerings and failed omens. He struck the flint himself. The fire roared to life, dry kindling catching fast, the pages curling inward like mouths swallowing themselves. The air filled with the scent of ash, but also something sweeter, something floral and bitter like dried hibiscus and charred honey. Smoke began to rise, thick and slow. At first it was just gray. Then it twisted. People gathered near the edges of the compound. They had seen smoke before, but not like this. The first image rose clearly from the flames. A woman, mouth sewn shut with threads made of iron, her hands stretched upward, palms open as if pleading to the sky. She dissolved, and another took her place. Kneeling figures with broken backs, each one holding a word inside their chests that tried to escape. A scream moved through the smoke, silent but vivid, felt in the ribs rather than heard in the ears. The fire crackled, but the villagers said it began to chant. Above the pit, a giant mouth emerged, one without a body hovering in the sky, lips parted, smoke curling from between the teeth. When it opened, instead of sound, a memory emerged. Nia's lullaby, as she had once sung it to Suas, echoed back into the world in color, violet, then gold, then ash. Then came the glass ceiling. It hovered above the flames, suspended by nothing, whole at first, but with each gust of wind, cracks spread through it. Fractures spiraled. And then, piece by piece, it reassembled in reverse. Shards that had never visibly broken flew upward, turning mid-air, settling gently back into a ceiling that had not been shattered, yet still bore the marks of having been rebuilt. But this time the reflection in the glass was not the stars. It was Nia's face. Aimo stumbled back. He shouted for water. For sand. For anything to extinguish the fire. But the pit would not obey him. The flames danced higher, laughing in shapes of every word he tried to destroy. A hush fell across the villagers. Then someone ran to the edge of the forest and returned with a diviner, old Mother Ioka, the blind woman who saw more than any eyes ever could. She came slowly, leaning on her staff carved with moons and roots, her head wrapped in black cloth. She stood before the smoke, nodded once and whispered, "This is no ordinary fire. This is a curse born not of vengeance, but of truth denied." Aimo scoffed. "Old woman, this is nothing. Just smoke and foolish minds." But Mother Ioka ignored him. "She wrote the truth into the world," she said, her voice growing. "You burn the truth. But truth does not burn. It rises." The villagers stared not at her but at the smoke now forming a final shape, a circle of mouths, open, unbroken, singing without fear. The image glowed briefly with color, every color Nia had ever spoken. Then it vanished into the sky. The fire went out on its own, leaving only ashes. And within the ashes the villagers found words unburnt, scattered but legible. A single phrase repeated over and over. You can silence a mouth but not a story. That night no one slept easily. Mothers clutched their daughters a little closer. Children asked about voices in dreams. Servants walked lighter, afraid of stepping on echoes. And in the center of it all, Chief Aimo sat in his glass room, alone, watching the ceiling, waiting for it to break. But it didn't. Instead, the reflection of his own face stared back at him, cracked straight down the middle. Nia lay quietly on her mat, the wounds inside her mouth nearly healed but the sting still fresh in her memory. She didn't dare speak aloud, not after the pepper punishment, but inside her mind her voice moved freely. It danced and curled like ribbons of color. Her inner voice had found a rhythm again, and though silent, it was more powerful than before. It became a song, not one of sorrow or submission but of defiance. She called it the Song of Shards. That night, while the compound slept, Nia closed her eyes and let the melody float in her mind. The notes shimmered in silence. Each unspoken lyric was a memory, her mother's soft humming before she died, the laughter of her siblings before fear changed them, the first time she realized her voice made light twist in the air. Now this new song echoed all of that but stronger, rooted not in fear but in resistance. Unknown to Nia, her siblings stirred in their sleep. Little Tima, barely 4, sat up groggily and looked around the room. "Nia?" she whispered, but Nia hadn't moved or made a sound. Yet Tima could feel it, a soft warmth brushing her skin like a lullaby held by the wind. Across the hall the older brother Toji sat upright, alert. He thought he heard something not through his ears but in his bones, a kind of music too deep for the body, too light for the air. He placed his hand on the floor and felt it vibrate, a pulse, gentle and persistent. The servants too began to notice strange changes. One by one as they moved through the compound in the morning light, they felt lighter. As if someone had opened a window inside their chests and let their buried dreams breathe for the first time. One servant, Idaya, who used to flinch at every shout from Aimo, now stood straighter, her steps no longer as hurried. She glanced up at the mysterious glass ceiling room as she walked past, her fingers brushing against her lips thoughtfully. She could not explain it but she felt sung to without sound. In the kitchen an older cook named Baba Kenu prepared breakfast with shaking hands. He whispered to himself, "There is a power here, but not of gods. Of a girl." As for Chief Aimo, the man who demanded silence and ruled with fear, he had begun to crack in places he didn't yet understand. The song found its way even to him. He would sit in the glass-ceilinged room late at night, obsessing over paperwork, only to look up and feel the glass shimmer faintly above him, like ripples in a pool disturbed by wind. The sensation unsettled him, though he tried to dismiss it as tiredness. But then he would feel the air thicken. His pen would stop writing. A memory long buried would rise uninvited. One such night, he was mid-sentence in a letter to the elders when the ink in his pot turned a soft shade of red. Not blood red, but rose-tinted, as if someone had mixed paint with poetry. He blinked. The color returned to black. Shaking his head, he stood and approached the glass ceiling. A soft hum trembled beneath his feet. His heart raced. "Nia?" he muttered. He didn't know why he said her name. Maybe the house whispered it. Maybe his own soul trembled in guilt. And then it happened. A single hairline crack appeared in the far corner of the glass ceiling. It was so faint, it looked like a thread of light. But he saw it. He shouted for the guards. No one came quickly enough. When they did arrive, he barked at them to inspect the room, to find who had broken the glass, to search for anyone hiding. They found nothing. The next day silence ruled again, but it was a different kind. Not forced. Not angry. It was charged like the hush before a storm. Nia said nothing to anyone. But her siblings began holding hands in quiet moments. The servants nodded to one another knowingly. In hidden corners, food was shared that once would have been hoarded. A girl who had not smiled in weeks giggled once when the wind tousled her hair just right. Small things but enough to feel like rebellion. The glass room now carried weight. No one entered it without shivering. People began calling it the singing room, though no songs were ever heard aloud. At night, light would sometimes shimmer along its ceiling in patterns that resembled waves. Some claimed it was just starlight. Others knew better. The song of shards had spread. Not as a sound but as a feeling. A connection. A pulse that bound the oppressed together. A rhythm that loosened chains, first emotional then perhaps real ones. Aimo grew worse. He began forbidding laughter, banning idle conversation, and punishing even the slightest disobedience. But the more he tried to control, the more the song grew. It was not just Nia's anymore. She had started it, yes. With her colors. With her pain. With her voice. But now it belonged to all who had ever been silenced. And beneath the shimmering glass, the cracks stretched a little farther each night. They were summoned at dawn, every soul in the compound, from the youngest servant to the oldest cook, herded into the grand glass-roofed hall. The walls shimmered with unnatural calm as if they too were holding their breath. Chief Aimo stood tall at the front, his robes heavier than usual, draped in red and gold symbols of silence. In his hands he clutched the ancestral staff, carved from a tree that had witnessed centuries of obedience. Behind him stood his guards, stern-faced and ready. In the center of the room, Nia was dragged forward, her arms bound, her eyes unblinking. The cut across her lip had barely healed, but her mouth was set, not in fear but in quiet defiance. Aimo's voice boomed, yet it seemed to echo off something invisible. "This girl," he declared, "has brought unrest into a home of order. She poisons the minds of children with whispers and dreams. Today her rebellion ends. Gasps rose from the gathered crowd. Not because of his words but because the air had grown thick, humming like a drum. The glass ceiling above them flickered as though reacting to a storm only it could sense. Light danced nervously on its surface. Nia's siblings clung to their mother's side, trembling. The servants exchanged looks, lips trembling with unspoken names. The oldest cook muttered a prayer, but the words twisted strangely in the air, becoming song. No one dared interrupt. Chief Aimo raised the staff high. To rid this home of noise and delusion, I offer this sacrifice to silence. His voice cracked with intensity. If she will not be quiet, she will be blinded. The eyes see what the tongue speaks. Nia blinked slowly. Her feet dug into the floor. She did not cry. She did not scream. Not yet. Aimo moved toward her, the staff poised like a sword. But before he could strike, Nia opened her mouth. It was not a cry of pain. It was not even a scream of protest. It was the sound of centuries breaking open. Her voice was a storm of color, emotion, and thunder. No words, just a primal, magical scream that rolled through the hall like a living wave. It struck the walls, climbed to the ceiling, and collided with the glass. And then, shattering. The glass above exploded, not in jagged, dangerous shards, but in pieces of light and wind and memory. They fell slowly, almost gently, like feathers. But each shard sang. Each shard held a voice that had been silenced. Of women, of girls, of ancestors buried with stories untold. The sound was unbearable and beautiful all at once. Songs of birth, of mourning, of rage, of joy echoed in layered tones. The hall became a chorus of the forgotten. Aimo staggered back, his staff disintegrating in his hands. He clutched his ears, screaming, but his voice was swallowed by the wave of release. He turned to run, but the air was thick with resistance, with rebellion, with long-held truth that refused to be hidden anymore. Nia rose, her binds burned away in the energy. She did not need to move, her voice moved for her. Her eyes glowed, her feet lifted an inch above the ground, and her scream turned into a song without words, just raw expression. Around her, others began to speak, not aloud but through the vibration in the air. A servant boy gasped, realizing he could hear his grandmother's lullaby. A guard dropped his spear, whispering his late sister's name. Even the babies in the arms of mothers cried out, not in fear, but in answer. The ceiling gone, the sky looked down for the first time on this hidden room. Stars still faint in the morning blue seemed to pulse as though watching. The wind that rushed in was not cold, it was electric with recognition. Chief Aimo fell to his knees. Make it stop, he begged. I built this home to protect tradition. I preserved order. But no one listened. The people in the hall had already moved beyond him. They were listening to the voices, old and new, near and far, speaking through each shining glass shard now embedded like stars in the walls, in the floor, in their memory. Nia walked past him. She placed her hand on the heart of the room. The center tile cracked, revealing roots beneath, roots that pulsed with light. She had broken no rule. She had revealed a truth. The tradition of silence had always been a lie, one built on fear of what women's voices could create. That day became legend. The day of shattering. The morning the sky heard the voice of a girl who refused to be erased. In the years to come they rebuilt the hall, but never replaced the glass ceiling. It was left open, a reminder that some things must be broken to let light in. And in the corners of every home that remembered, girls were taught not to whisper but to sing. The sun had not yet risen when the procession began. Drums beat slowly, not for celebration but for reckoning. Aimo walked at the center, no longer adorned in fine robes or jeweled cuffs. His wrists were bound with rope, not gold, and his head hung low, though defiance still flickered in his eyes. Villagers gathered in silence, not out of fear this time but in anticipation of justice. The courtyard was transformed into a place of judgment. The elders sat in a half-circle, their faces marked with ash and chalk. Behind them stood the sacred gourd of truth, known to reveal lies through cracks. At the edge of the crowd stood Nia, her mouth closed, her eyes unwavering. The trial began with ritual silence. Then the lead elder raised his staff. Let those with truth step forward. And they did. The first was a woman with a baby wrapped in cloth on her back. She spoke of how her child had once cried endlessly in the night until she began to hear songs without sound. They soothed him, she said. Even now, when the wind moves through our doorway, my son sleeps as if carried by spirit arms. A young boy followed. I saw the smoke, he said, his small hands trembling. It wasn't normal. It told stories, of pain, of chains, of fire. We all saw it and Aimo said it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. Servants came forward one by one, each with their piece. One had seen the letters thrown into the fire, another had heard voices singing near the glass roof room at night. A third spoke of mirrors fogging without heat. Even the walls mourned, she said. Then came the elder who had dreamt the dream. He stepped forward slowly, his cane tapping the earth like a drumbeat of memory. That night, he said, I dreamt of stars. A girl stood beneath them, her mouth wide open, her scream caught like a comet in the sky. And when I awoke, my robe was lined with ash, though no fire had been near. The courtyard held its breath. I had dismissed it, he continued, until I entered this house and heard whispers in my ear. Not speech. Not sound. But feeling. I understand now. That girl's silence speaks louder than any man's decree. Aimo's lips curled. Witchcraft, he muttered. Hallucination. Weak minds drunk on superstition. But the gourd cracked. A thin line split its side, glowing faintly. The lead elder pointed his staff. You claim tradition. But what tradition burns a child's voice and then calls it law? You claim order, yet your house birthed a storm of spirits. Do you deny you silenced your daughter? She is not mine. Aimo snapped. She is a curse brought in by that woman, her mother, before she died. That girl was always strange. I only did what was necessary. The wind shifted. The crowd murmured. The gourd cracked again, this time across its neck. The lead elder nodded solemnly. You do not deny the act. You do not deny the fire, the pepper, the burnings. You do not deny the ritual of silence. The girl lived. You tried to erase her. And yet here she stands, unbroken. Aimo turned his glare to Nia. She brings chaos. What order can exist when girls believe their voices are sacred? Do you not see the danger? Today it's whispers, tomorrow, rebellion. Then for the first time Nia stepped forward. She did not speak. Her mouth remained closed, but the wind around her stirred. A sudden hush fell like the air before a storm. And in that silence, the leaves in the trees began to tremble. Small glints of glass, swept from the shattered roof, danced in the sunlight behind her. No sound came from her, but the crowd felt something rise, grief, defiance, hope, all layered in invisible threads that wrapped around the heart. One elder clutched his chest. Another closed her eyes, tears leaking through the wrinkles. Even the animals near the courtyard stilled, as if listening. When it passed, Nia bowed her head and returned to the side. The gourd cracked once more, clean down the center. It split open with a sigh, its glowing contents seeping into the earth. The lead elder picked up a shard and held it high. The gourd has spoken. Truth has split it open. Chief Aimo, your time and power ends here. You are stripped of your name, your titles, and your voice in this village. You shall be exiled beyond the river and may not return. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by a long silence. But what of the girl? One elder asked. What of this gift? Another frowned. It is powerful. Some may seek to control it. Or fear it, added a third. Power without form is threat. The lead elder looked at Nia. She has harmed no one. Only revealed what others wished hidden. Her voice is not a curse, it is a mirror. What you saw in it was your own face. He turned to the crowd. Let it be known that no child's voice shall be silenced by force again. Let it be remembered that not all speech needs sound. And let it be taught that truth finds a way even in silence. The people nodded, murmuring agreement. The wind rustled the trees once more, gentle this time, like a lullaby on the breath of morning. And Nia, still quiet, smiled. Not because she had won, but because the silence had finally spoken. The shattered glass had long been cleared, but its memory still glittered in the minds of those who lived through that day. The room that once silenced Nia had become something else entirely. In place of fear there was color. In place of quiet there was sound. Nia stood in the center of the space where once she had screamed so powerfully that even the sky seemed to reply. Now she was building again, but not with bricks or stone. She was building a legacy. The villagers, once cautious of her presence, now brought their children to her, their faces unsure but curious. Some still feared the power that had brought down Chief Aimo and cracked the stars open. Others whispered that she was a spirit in human form, a girl gifted by gods no one dared name. But when Nia knelt to greet each child, when she sang them songs that painted the air with light, fear became reverence. She didn't raise her voice with command, she simply invited others to find theirs. The glass roof room no longer had a ceiling. Instead, it opened straight into the sky. Where once there were barriers, now there was endless possibility. She taught the children here, sitting in circles on woven mats, chalking dreams on the walls, humming tones that carried their emotions. Some sang. Some cried. Some simply sat and listened. But all of them were heard. Among them were girls who had never spoken in their own homes, girls who'd been told their thoughts were dangerous, their questions shameful. Nia watched them bloom like late flowers, defying the seasons that once held them back. She taught them to chant when words trembled, to write when their voices cracked, and to scream when the world demanded silence. Screaming, she told them, was not always pain. Sometimes it was truth too big for any other sound. Boys came too, some hesitant, others curious. She welcomed them just the same. She spoke not just of power but of balance, of how the world had twisted silence into chains and noise into punishment. Together they created a language of images, of movement, of shared memory. Children who once flinched at a raised hand now raised their own in question, in art, in dance. The sanctuary became a place of healing. Word spread beyond the village. People came walking for hours just to sit in the open room where the wind always seemed to carry music. Even the diviners came, offering not warnings but blessings. They said the smoke that once bore a curse had cleared, and what remained was not a girl but a force. Still, Nia smiled when they said such things. She didn't feel like a force. She felt like a girl who had simply refused to disappear. Old Aimo's name faded from the stories. He lived somewhere far, exiled and forgotten, swallowed by the silence he once forced on others. But Nia's name grew louder with each retelling. They said the stars bent lower when she sang, that her tears could etch words on stone, that she had taught the sky itself how to speak. One night, as the wind swept through the glassless room, Nia sat alone, her fingers tracing the scars on her palms. She wasn't angry anymore. Anger had burned hot and fast, but what remained was deeper, purpose. The scream that had once broken everything now echoed as something else entirely. It was a beginning. A little girl came and sat beside her, silent. Nia waited. The girl opened her mouth but hesitated, lips trembling. Then she whispered, "My father says girls shouldn't talk too much." Nia looked at her, eyes calm but fierce. "Then talk louder." The girl blinked. "Not because it's rebellion," Nia continued, "but because there's power in truth. And no one should ever feel their voice is a sin." The girl nodded slowly. Then she sang, a quiet, crooked little tune about a bird with no wings. And when she was done she smiled. Nia smiled too. Years passed and the sanctuary grew. It was no longer just a room but a movement. Songs born there were sung at village gatherings. Poems painted by children covered the walls of huts and council halls. Girls led debates, crafted scrolls and stood as advisors. And in the center of it all was Nia, not as ruler but as reminder. Her story became legend not because of the magic in her voice, but because she had used it even when the world tried to erase it. They said her screams still echoed in the clouds, and during storms, some claimed to hear her name in the thunder. It was not fear they felt, it was awe. Sometimes injustice would try to rise again. A chief would silence his daughter. A council would ban a protest. A family would whisper that girls should know their place. And in those moments someone would say it, quietly, firmly, like a sacred phrase. "Do not forget the scream that shattered the sky." And they wouldn't. Not ever.